This is a call to order the meeting of the Transportation Tax Committee. I'd like to have myself do it's not on the agenda, but have the Pledge of Allegiance. And could you do the invocation? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father God, a few of your children gathered this morning to help the citizens of Jasper County and our two municipalities with the transportation sales tax meeting. Please help us to make some good decisions for our citizens, and we thank you for allowing us this time. Amen.
Thank you. Amen. I'd like to welcome everybody here. Vice Chairman Rowell, Jasper County. Thank you for showing up. And I just want to make sure that we are holding these meetings on a consistent basis to make sure that we tell the people that voted for this referendum that we're taking care of their money. Ms. Kate Schaefer, you're up.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the green belt component of the approved 2024 Jasper County sales tax. My name is Kate Schaefer. I'm the Director of Land Protection with the Open Land Trust, and I've been before you a couple times to talk about the startup of this program and how a conservation sales tax funding program can be started here in Jasper County, fine-tuned to the needs of Jasper County citizens and residents, and protective of the landscapes that make this county so special. So thank you for the opportunity. As a reminder of how we got here, you all know this well, but to anyone listening, this passed a sales tax funding road construction and land conservation passed in November with over 55% of the vote. It passed in nearly every precinct, and conservation is a near-term way to return on that investment and that vote to the voters. We've talked before about the road construction projects and how the design and the engineering and ultimately the construction can take some time. The conservation component of the sales tax is something that you can do with urgency and in the near term, which will continue to show to voters, to your point, Chairman Kemp, that their money is being used wisely and is being used to address real challenges, which are a lot of which stem from growth in the fastest growing county on the East Coast, things like adequate infrastructure and adequate land protection. So 80% of the funding toward the road construction, design, and engineering piece, which you've heard a lot about from county staff and consultants, and 20% of that funding toward land conservation, which is the part that I'm going to specifically talk about today. Our goal today, at the end of this meeting, is really to take your feedback and give your county staff enough information to finalize an ordinance that would be presented to county council that would stand up this program and allow the program to be established, allow applicants and landowners to apply for funding, and allow projects to be completed. Again, as a reminder, this is a sales tax program, and so sales tax is something that is paid by everyone when they spend money in Jasper County. So not just Jasper County residents, but visitors that come through this area on a commute or on a day trip or on a vacation, which is a way many counties have chosen to fund road construction and land conservation across the state of South Carolina. It is enabled by the South Carolina Code of Laws that allows counties to do this, and there are several other counties, examples from which you'll see embedded in the ordinance under your review today. You all saw a document that looked like this last time we met in April, and it's just a flow chart of the process. I want to highlight two things that are shown in kind of that peachy color. All projects require a willing landowner. So this is not a program that involves condemnation or, government overreach to take land, but it involves a willing landowner to apply for funding. And then ultimately, all decisions are made by Jasper County Council. That is also true for the transportation component of the sales tax program. But I just want to highlight those two things because I think it's important to remember these are real families, real landowners applying for funding, and accountable elected officials ultimately making that decision. So the big questions for today, as we think through this process and this flow chart about the program, are, how and where and when do you want a citizens committee to weigh in? To what extent do you want to fund due diligence and what matters in that regard? And then if there's any items in the scoring of what determines a project to be good or worthy of funding that you especially believe Jasper County funding should emphasize. So, for example, water quality is sometimes an attribute that rises to the top, and I imagine would be very important in Jasper County because of all the rivers and the water systems that you have here, the ability to protect water quality. So, if a project comes before you and it does a lot for water quality, we can emphasize that in the scoring system and how that project is judged compared to a project that doesn't do as much for water quality. And it'll allow you to have an apples to apples assessment of, a good project. So that's my hope for today. Did I leave anything out that you definitely want to cover?
Chair, could you explain this Greenbelt flow chart? I'm fine till I get to site visit due diligence, then it goes up and says no, then it goes to refinement, then if you come back down, the site visit goes to scoring and staff, then it goes up no, and both of those are hitting refinement. Could you explain that?
Sure, I'd be happy to give an example. So if a landowner and a land trust apply for land conservation funding, there's a component of staff review. Is that complete? Do they actually own the property? Is the property correctly described on the application? You need to make sure you have the foundational information in order to make a decision. If that moves toward the due diligence part of the program, it would be prudent to require things like a survey and an appraisal and a phase 1 environmental analysis to make sure you're not paying toward a property that has toxic chemicals stored on it or something like that. If the answer to those questions, like the acreage is not correct, or the landowner doesn't own the land, or the appraisal is incomplete, or there are toxic chemicals stored on the property, is no, then that project needs refinement. It's not going to move forward in the process, which is why there's that little bump out in the flow chart. But ideally, you would have an applicant, maybe the city of Hardeeville or the town of Ridgeland, maybe a land trust, maybe SCDNR applying for you, and those boxes would be checked because we want to be competent in our jobs and roles as applicants. So hopefully you don't need that refinement period. But that's an opportunity afforded to you that other programs have said, this part of the application is incomplete. Can you take this back and, come back to us in 6 months when it's more clear? But thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more. I have slides that kind of walk through this flow chart. Great question. Anything else you all would really like to get out of the discussion today before you send this program ordinance on to County Council?
I'm sorry, Chairman.
Sorry.
May I?
Yes. Yes, you may.
I'm not used to being.
Yeah, I know. I'm relishing it, by the way.
On the very first start, an application, I would suggest that rather than just wait for applications to come our way, that we actively, perhaps not publicly for obvious reasons, but at least have a outline in our minds of where we would like to preserve, as opposed to just letting some landowner come and ask us for an easement or purchase an easement. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that, but I'll get to that later. So we should also have an active set of goals on what parts of the county do we want to preserve. As a beat to that, as I stated the last meeting, I think, just me, that the $94 million should be spent completely on land purchasing. Not easements, that the landowner just gets to preserve parts of his property. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, but purchasing it. So there cannot be any change down the future. The county owns the land, it's preserved forever. An easement, there's a lot of outs in that. And so, and lastly, I don't think it should be a citizens committee.
Okay.
I think it should be a committee of 3 from the county and both municipalities, and let those entities decide whether or not they want a staff, an elected official, or a citizen to represent them. I think each jurisdiction should decide who their representative is. That's my recommendation.
And I believe that is how this committee was formed. And so again, the choice of this committee, if you all choose to be that citizens committee or to be that committee in the process, that's what's up for discussion today. To your other points about easements and where to protect property, I'll start with where. On the image here, I shared a screenshot of a map from the South Carolina Conservation Bank, and my recommendation is that this is a priority vision that can be used to start up the program. And if you choose to refine this and bring in a consultant and come up with a 5-year plan or integrate that in some way to comprehensive planning through the life of the 15-year program, that is well within your right. But to start somewhere, the Conservation Bank has a very thorough analysis that they update annually with protected land and priority land layers, looking at things like cultural resources, agricultural lands, water quality, public access, those types of things. And for this area, as a practitioner who ground truths this map regularly, I think their data matches up with real life, which is really important. To your point about easements or actually owning the land, a municipality or the county owning the land, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I want to dive in there. But I do just want to start with the premise that the term conservation easement is different than you might think of like a power line easement or a utility easement, in that it is permanent. And so it can't be changed in the future. And part of my role in my job at the Open Land Trust is to work with new landowners to write those conservation easements. So there's a big burden to do that well, because we're not changing that easement in the future. The only way we can actually change the easement as an organization is to make it more strict if the landowner chooses to do so. So for example, if a landowner says, I want the right to build 4 homes, and in the future, they call up some future staff member and says, actually, I'd like the right to build 5 homes, we are legally obligated to say no. And they cannot do that. If they call up the land trust and say, I only want to build 3 homes, you can amend the document to make it more strict. But that is the only way an easement can be changed. So let's dive in there. Just want to start with some basics.
I just have a question.
Sure.
You had said about the landowner has to come to us or something like that. Is there anything that precludes them for us taking over land?
Like a condemnation?
Yeah. I mean, is that something set up here that we don't do or can't do? Because that's going to be one of the things that they're going to say, well, this is for condemnation.
Yeah, so this program is for is voluntary, is not condemnation. You would use the powers of government condemnation if you were, for example, like SCDOT is going to condemn right of way to build a new road. That is within their government powers. You have government powers of condemnation, but to use county sales tax proceeds to do that is not prescribed.
Well, I just want to bring that on the record that
Correct.
that's what's there.
Yeah, there is not, this does not involve condemnation of land. It involves a willing landowner. And to your point about soliciting and going after priorities, I can promise, although you see me a lot, there are several professionals in the conservation community and the landowner community that talk to each other and landowners all the time about those priorities. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration. One of the things your ordinance is going to define is, who applies for the program on behalf of the landowner. When maybe it's the Department of Natural Resources or the Town of Ridgeland's Parks program or something like that. So you'll see the details there too.
In this, I guess we'll pass an ordinance, and I guess this is from the administrator. Let's say we have passed the ordinance and all that, and how does that land get acquired after we have the purchase and all that? Do we have to have an ordinance that we accept that land? The only reason I'm asking that is, when does and I guess I think that learning from what Buford happened to Buford, we have to have some people talking, other than a committee of three.
Absolutely.
When we limit, that means that we're controlling. We want some of the control to go, at least to have listening
Sure.
hours. So how would that work? Do you have any idea?
I'm not really quite sure.
What I'm saying is, okay, we're gonna purchase of land, whatever, let's say a Point South, that's happened, right? And we're gonna put 30 million or 10 million in, we had to put 10 million in. Is there gonna be a way that the people will be able to express yes or no?
You mean, can you solicit public comment? on
Right,
each of
is
those
that gonna be part of the process?
Absolutely. Kate mentioned about who is the committee. You know, my preference is that you all stay as the committee, and you can have public hearings on any of the applications you wanted to.
Could that be put in the ordinance, just to make it a process?
There are a number of things I think Kate's gone through that you're gonna have to, county council's gonna have to consider. But, recommendations from you at this level, at this time, are helpful so that we can take to them. You reviewed the ordinance. A committee is a question. It refers to staff. Again, you know, my preference is that we not have actual county staff doing the rankings and applications, that we get that away from us and we hire a separate organization to review that based on the standards and applications that you have approved, so that the independent group hired by the county would review the application, make sure it was in right form. They would do the due diligence. They would make sure that they ran it through the gauntlet, that it qualified. They would then hand it off back to county staff as a recommendation to the county council.
So what we're saying, to clarify, I'm just trying to clarify some of this stuff
Sure.
for everybody. So this committee is a county committee, correct?
It is a county committee.
County committee.
It's defined by the ordinance.
Right.
The actual referendum ordinance.
So what happens here, we're going to bring before the county.
Correct.
Yes, and
Okay.
if you read the ordinance that established this committee, it says that you review and make recommendations on projects, right? I would argue and would encourage you to review that and define that as making recommendations on the greenbelt items, just as you would the road project.
Yeah, and if you look here in this flow chart, it says the program is responsible for. One of those items is a council resolution. So Chairman Kemp, just like you pass a resolution at council for any number of things, you would pass a resolution to fund an easement or a resolution to fund a purchase at the specified level for the specified property every single time. And so what the voters approved is for you to be able to levy the sales tax over 15 years, up to $94 million for land conservation purposes. What you all are charged at reviewing is what makes a good conservation project. That's the application requirements and the scoring rubric. And then how does that application move through the county process? But the end of the county process is a resolution passed by county council, which is inherently has public input. You can set a public hearing. The council committee, just like you all, subject to FOIA, subject to ethics laws. There's language in this draft ordinance that says if you know the property owner or you benefit financially, you recuse yourself, just like any other opportunity. And so in Beaufort County, the Green Space Program passes their decisions by resolution of county council. In other counties, it may be an ordinance. But those are the two mechanisms ultimately that will direct staff to send the funding to the escrow account for that specific project. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
I think this is just a feeler to me. I'm feeling it out. Do we have a separate budget, or is it included in the county budget? How does that work?
No, sir, it'll be a separate bank account, obviously, that all the
Right.
funding goes in. The treasurer has set up that account. Collections started in May, right? So they'll start to trickle in. We'll have a report for you, probably the end of June, the first money's coming in. You will be able to hire the program manager, which is for the road work, out of those funds. You would also potentially be able to hire a third party to review all this on the Greenbelt side out of those funds as well. And we'll show you that as we get a little closer. So your ordinance authorizes admin costs and those kinds of things. So we can talk about that, Mr. Kemp. We probably do need to have a small page in the budget, just as we do with other commissions, so that everyone can see that.
Right.
And the ordinance that we're talking about that's going to county council defines all this. I know it's kind of overwhelming, but Mr. Kemp, I'm sure you will work that through workshop with your county council, so there'll be plenty of public input in that as it moves forward. And then, of course, it'll have the regular 3 readings and at least 1 public hearing before you're all satisfied with it.
I just wanted to make sure everybody knows. This is, some of this stuff I probably know and everybody knows, but I just want to make sure we have a record of this. So because one of the complaints was, at least that I've been hearing, is we passed a referendum, but we never read it. Nobody ever read it. They just passed it.
You know, sir, I think your questions are great, and they're getting to the point that we're all trying to do this very carefully and with a lot of public input and make sure we get it right.
Right.
Working on it for a long time, and we're proud of it, so we want it to be a good product. I also thought, Mr. Chairman, if you'd allow, there was some discussion from the mayor a little bit about easements, and I want you to think about $94 million over 15 years is a lot of money, but then it's not a lot of money, given the land prices. And maybe, Kate, you could help with, over the last 3 years, almost 20,000 acres has been put into conservation in Jasper County. That's 30 square miles. And Kate and her colleagues have been working on that behind the scenes. The money that we're talking about, you may purchase fee simple property, but more than likely that will not be the scenario. You will be a partner with many other organizations in what we would call taking down these properties. And our goal has always been to allow them to have some sort of, if at all possible, some public access as well. So Kate, I've got here Slater, Buckfield Tract, 12,000 acres, Gregory Neck, 4,400, and Chelsea, the most recent one of 2,700 acres. And those all have a component of being open to the public for public enjoyment. They also, thank goodness, have a component where the county has no maintenance responsibility in any of those situations. And you may have read that Chelsea is likely to become the first new forest, state forest in South Carolina in 20 years. So Kate, could you just speak a little bit about those creative things you see going forward and how this money is really sort of very much like your road project money. It's used, as the mayor's always said quite eloquently, as seed money to help with grants and to help you leverage other funds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a couple of examples for you. I think the takeaway there is that you can have public benefit for all different types of land conservation, whether that's a park or a wildlife management area or an easement that remains privately owned but still has public benefit because that property is not developed and generating stormwater into the rivers and things like that. You can also have public ownership and public access. And so part of what every good conservation program does in the state of South Carolina, and I think South Carolina is really a model for this type of work nationally, is combine or find the right balance between private ownership and permanent conservation and public access and permanent conservation, because it's a patchwork. We can't afford, even with $94 million, to go out and buy everything that's important. That $94 million would be spent very quickly. And And, we don't necessarily want to go out and privately protect everything that's important, because then the public never gets to go outside and enjoy nature. I heard you talk at the beginning, Mr. Moyd, about, the public access right here in Hardyville. We have the National Wildlife Refuge. Well, I'm going to show you, but there's a new property coming online from the Department of Natural Resources that will add to the public access in this neighborhood, and so on and so forth. So I'd like to continue with those examples after just a couple of slides about what an easement really is, which I think will answer some of your questions, Mayor Williams.
Just one more. Mr.
No,
Lloyd had
they
it.
answered,
Okay.
they answered most of my question, but the only thing I wanted to know is, they answered most of it, but this ordinance, when do you all anticipate passing this ordinance? I mean, first reading,
I don't know. It's after this meeting, and then we have this meeting, then we have one with in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we'll have Mr. Anicki here to talk about his situation, and then we had the bonding to come in. So it's a process, as I always say, and to me, I guess I have to get with the administrator and say, okay, how do we plan this?
Yes, sir, we'll have to,
Budget time, lots of other workshops, so we'll have to we can lay out a timeline for you, a proposed timeline.
Right, for the next
Keep us
meeting.
all on track. But a key component of that is the green print, which, you can get all your rules and regulations together, but the green print will establish, Mr. Mayor, the priorities, so that applications that land within that can be scored appropriately. And that is going to, in my humble opinion, that'll be the item that'll get the most public
Right.
excitement and input.
Okay. So again, just kind of 101 about easements and fee simple acquisitions, which is what this program can fund. What is a conservation easement? We've talked a little bit about this already, but like I mentioned, it is voluntary with the landowner. No, government taking of the land. It is permanent. To your point, Mayor Williams, again, it is not something that can be changed. When it is held by an accredited land trust. There are 24 land trusts in the state of South Carolina, several in this community, and I'm going to talk about some of those groups so you know some of the people. It is recorded at the Register of Deeds, and so it stays on the property forever. If I own a piece of property that is protected with a conservation easement, and then I sell that property, the easement stays with the land. So the future landowner who buys that property can't change that easement either. And that's a really important component. Sometimes we talk about deed restrictions or covenants. Those can be changed by the landowner. Easements cannot. Each easement is unique. So there's not, while there's general best practices, it's not the same document for every property because every property is different. And that's the really incredible way that easements can be a good tool for land conservation, because you can fine tune them to protect the most important features of a given property. So why would a landowner want to do this? And you'll keep seeing on the maps that several landowners have. I should go back just to highlight this area of Jasper County. Everything in green and purple has been permanently protected. So this is not necessarily a new thing. You all are new to being able to provide funding to incentivize landowners to do this, which is a great way to show leadership. But several thousand acres along the Savannah River, in the Port Royal Sound, under private ownership and state ownership, have been permanently protected, which is shown, and we can do more.
Kate and Andy, in your list, there's 1,300 acres in the conservation easement that is deeded to the city in East Argent. So you might want to include that
make sure that's reflected.
yeah, you might as well add it to there's another 1,300 you can add to the list.
Great.
Great, I'm making that note. Thank you. Okay, so why would a landowner want to do this? There are several benefits to the landowner, but lead with peace of mind, knowing the land will remain protected forever. We live in a place that not only has incredible landscapes and abundant cultural and natural resources, but a community of landowners that love the land. I think if you talk to anybody that has grown up in South Carolina or that has moved here, that is something they will tell you. We love this place. And so conservation easements are an opportunity to protect that land even after that landowner moves on. And that provides peace of mind. That's really important. I don't want to downplay the way the landowner chooses to make that decision. There are possible financial incentives as well. Tax reductions, tax deductions, if you follow IRS protocol. And then finally, the second bullet point is direct financial compensation, which is what you all are establishing via this Greenbelt program. So possible direct compensation. I want to reassure you that is always based on an independent third-party appraisal. If you think a property is worth $10 million, that's great, but an independent third-party appraiser needs to review that because that landowner might think the property is worth $15 million. I might think the property is worth $12 million. Our opinions are our opinions, but the third party appraisal, that is the professional in assessing land value, is what is going to determine the amount of grant funding you all can consider. So rest assured that the tax dollars are being spent based on that professional opinion and not just someone's opinion of value, because everybody thinks their land is the most valuable or the most beautiful. We can relate to the human nature element of that. And I also just want to share and remind you that several other counties are doing this program as well, where they provide direct financial compensation. And so there's great examples to look toward to make sure this program has discipline and accountability. Your administrator talked about the separate fund. This project is, funding is collected through the sales tax over 15 years, as just started in May. The bond referendum and the ordinance passed also requires an annual audit of those funds and an update, so we can ensure those funds are being spent wisely. As I mentioned, Beaufort County has a program like this where they use sales tax funds to fund land protection. Charleston County has been doing this as well since 2004. Berkeley County, Dorchester County, Oconee County all have sales tax programs for land conservation. So while I would argue you're a leader, you're not alone. Or reinventing the wheel. Florence, Greenville, and have funds toward land conservation, just appropriated from their general operating budget. And then the state of South Carolina has the State Conservation Bank, which receives legislative appropriations for conservation. And because of all of this, there's great structure and discipline to not only evaluate properties and then help evaluate this independent appraised value. Are there questions about that? Okay. So a lot of questions we get about easements is what happens after the property is put under easement. Well, an easement is going to spell out the things you can do on the property. So you own your property, you want to build a home for each of your 4 children, the easement will allow you to do that. You can live there, you can continue to enjoy the property, you can build a barn or a pole shed, or you can harvest timber, you can have a hunting lease. The permitted rights that remain with the easement allow a lot of landowners to recreate, to enjoy, to live on their property. And so sometimes a misnomer is that easements mean you can't touch it anymore and you can't do anything with the property. But these are designed to support the natural resources on the property and allow some enjoyable use and everyday use of that property. So many landowners that protect their property with conservation easements, again, still live on the property, grow trees, grow crops, hunt, recreate, that type of thing.
So, Kate, so if we, the county, purchased 1,000 acres, conservation easement from Joe,
Yep.
he's still allowed to build a home on that?
Yes. So I want you to imagine, that's a great example, and let's walk through that. The county is going to provide funding toward a conservation easement between a land trust and Joe. They're going to write that easement and describe the rights that are still allowed on that property. So just like the easement the city of Hardeeville has, where you have the right to build walking trails or the right to do those types of things, the landowner is going to have the right within reason to do certain things. Now, what that typically looks like, let's say it's 1,000 acres, is maybe the right to build 4 homes. 4 homes on 1,000 acres is not going to diminish the natural resource value of that property. It's not going to generate a lot of stormwater into the river that may run by it. It's not going to fragment the property. If Joe asked, let's say the Open Land Trust or Ducks Unlimited or Low Country Land Trust or someone else, I'd like to build 100 homes on my property, the land trust is not going to agree to that. And you all might see that easement and think, why are we funding this? That's development. So there's you're going to be presented with an easement document, and that is what that appraiser is actually going to evaluate. What's the value of this conservation easement? What's the value of the rights the landowner is giving up? And that's what they're going to be able to be compensated for.
See,
I'm sorry. Go on.
I think it'll make more sense with examples. So if you don't mind, I'd like to give a couple of examples.
I think I could I can help you that
Okay.
way. You gave me, or I think somebody gave me when I was up in Charleston came down, easements 101. I think you could, if you would, could
Yeah.
you send that to all of us?
Yep.
And it would help out?
Perfect.
It just, now you can go on. There's an easement, there's a whole 101 that explains almost
no,
everything.
I understand, and I always was under the impression, like what with Hardyville's owns the easement. And we can do the fourth bullet point. We can develop passive recreation, walking trails, fishing. What I'm uncomfortable with, and maybe because it's my lack of understanding, is that we're going to give Joe $10 million, but he still has rights to do what he wants to the land. Now, that may have minimal impact, but he still can disrupt the land. He can still timber and put a farm on there. And, so we're enriching him and still giving him rights. I'm a little uncomfortable.
I think what will make you more comfortable is to talk through some examples and see some easement
Yeah,
documents, because conservation easements, again, are tailored to each property. So I'll give you an example. We have an easement on 1,000 acres on the Combahee River, and there is no timber harvesting along the 200 acres adjacent to the river that routinely floods. That is off limits for timber harvesting. Timber harvesting can occur on the other uplands. And from a natural resource perspective, that makes sense, because the most sensitive areas nearest to the river are protected further. But, a conservation-based forestry operation can take place on the remainder, which is allowed by state and federal law as well. So each easement is going to be tailored to the property, and I have some examples. What's absolutely not going to be allowed across the board are things like the rights to convert to commercial uses, like storefronts, to develop industrial uses, the right to do sand mining. So those are going to be things that are just off the table altogether, and those are some of the rights the landowner is giving up. For your example with John, who owns 1,000 acres, or Joe, who owns 1,000 acres, Joe's going to be giving up the right to subdivide that property 100 times and build 100 homes. He's absolutely going to be giving up the right to turn it into a housing subdivision. And again, the easement is going to reflect that forever. This is enforced by the land trust, which is, or any accredited land trust. This is the land trust's job forever and ever, to annually monitor this property. Every land trust has a stewardship arm that goes out to every property that they have under easement every year to make sure these rules are being followed. If the rules are not being followed, the land trust, as specified in the easement, has enforcement ability and can bring enforcement actions if the landowner has violated a term of the conservation easement. We really haven't seen this take place, but it is an opportunity afforded to the land trust. And, it would be something you would find even on your own easement. If you violated that, the land trust that you co-hold the easement with would be able to not just slap you on the wrist, but, take into account your easement violation with enforcement.
On that stewardship, does that mean we have costs after the 92 is?
No,
That's-
it's because this is the land trust's role.
Okay, it's the land trust,
And
right?
that's one of the benefits of conservation easements, and that's one of the ways conservation easements can actually be more efficient for taxpayer dollars, because the responsibility of enforcement is not Jasper County's responsibility. It is the independent land trust. And all of our easements say that, if we have a responsibility to enforce this easement forever, if we ever disappeared, another land trust would assume that enforcement responsibility. So there's perpetual protections. That's when we say easements are in perpetuity. They are forever.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Uh, Just, just to make everything clear, let's go Chelsea South. You just bought that.
Sure.
Somebody bought that, right? Let's say we had the money in the bank, that we had it, right? Right now, we had nothing to do with it. But the land trust came to us for $1 million as seed money,
Yep.
right? How does that work? I mean, we'll have a resolution and all that, but it's really under your control. We're not giving it to that landowner. We're giving it to you to give to the landowner. Am I correct with that?
Yes, and again, I have some examples of how that might work. So let me just close the loop here. No, it's great. I'm happy that we can have this conversation because I think these are really, really good questions. Just again, to close the loop on the easement process, you're going to have an interested landowner, a land trust partner. You're going to specify those easement terms, building 4 homes, not 100 homes. You're going to base the easement value on an independent third-party appraisal. And then specific to Jasper County's ability to fund these acquisitions, you would have a grant application that would lay all of this out. And it would say to you, Mayor Williams, Chairman Kemp, Mr. Moyd, Mayor Malfris, here's why $1 million should go toward the permanent protection of this 1,000 acres, because this is how it's going to be permanently protected forever. These are the rights that are being retained. These are the rights that are being given up. This is the assurance you have. That final easement is recorded. It's a real estate transaction, again, recorded in the Register of Deeds, and then the stewardship takes place forever.
And the deed is registered under the ownership of Jasper County.
No, so it's recorded in the Jasper County Register of Deeds between the land trust and the landowner, but it stays on the property. So if that landowner sells it and the next buyer does a title search, it comes up associated with the property and says, these are the rules.
So whose name is on the deed? Who actually owns it, the property?
Let's
Joe?
go through that. So Mr. Glover worked on a conservation easement in 2012 for a piece of property he owned in the town of Ridgeland, or near the town of Ridgeland, 226,000 acres. He chose to grant that conservation easement to Ducks Unlimited, which is a conservation partner that works regularly in this region. He actually was paid $405,000 from the State Conservation Bank to give up the development rights associated with this property to permanently protect the property. And this property will be protected forever under the terms he set forth with Ducks Unlimited. So Mr. Glover owned the property. Ducks Unlimited enforces the easement. The property, I believe, has sold to another landowner. And that second landowner follows the rules that were granted with the conservation easement, because that easement has stayed with the land. And Ducks Unlimited has the ability to work with that landowner and enforce those easement terms. So you all have probably driven by this property. It's behind the landfill. I can show you on this map if you see Glover on in the middle there in the bright green. That's the 2,000 acres we're talking about. So that's an example of a local property owner choosing to grant a conservation easement with an accredited land trust that is professional in enforcing and monitoring that easement. That landowner was compensated based on the easement value in order to do that, and the land remains protected today, and it will forever.
Can I just say
Yeah.
one quick thing? I know this is a lot, but you won't be doing this alone, right? We're trying to set this up so that you're a contributor in these larger deals. And you will learn all of these groups, as I have over the last few years, which is amazing. But here I have made a little list of Ducks Unlimited, the Spring Island Trust, the Port Royal Sound Foundation, the Open Space Institute, the Low Country Land Trust, the Trust for Public Land, the Nature Conservancy, South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, obviously, and the Beaufort County Open Land Trust. All of those groups have professionals and do this for a living. I don't want you to have all that pressure on you. You will be relying on a lot of their processes as well to ensure that due diligence has been done on all the applications for the properties. You'll have a lot of support and a lot of professional help there in doing that as you consider being a partner in these deals.
Yeah, that's great. While we're talking about this particular property, just want to highlight, this is privately owned, but there's public benefit because the property remains forested. So if you think about the Bees Creek that flows under 462 back through these properties, that water quality is improved by forest cover on the Glover property, even if it's timbered and replanted, following Forestry Commission's best management practices that South Carolina foresters do. And the property has public benefit for the town of Ridgeland is by providing kind of a protected land edge to the town and not requiring Ridgeland to extend services for a development on the edge of a town. So there's public benefit even when there's private ownership. Another example is nearby along the Broad River, and that's was an example a donated easement. So this landowner did not seek compensation for the easement, but 958 acres have been protected permanently between the Huguenin family and the Low Country Land Trust. This is a family-owned property. The family still lives there, and they can continue to live there under the terms of the easement and have a family home site and a dock out onto the river, but you're not going to end up with 100 docks or 100 homes or 958 homes if the property were to be developed.
You said that once the property is sold, it's forever.
Mm-hmm.
You had up there 2002 to 2023.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Huguenin family owns several parcels, and they've done actually 7 easements over the period of that time span. So their most recent easement was in 2023, but they actually started granting conservation in 2002. Yeah, so that's a really important clarification. I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you. But all of them extend to forever. They just did their first project in 2002, liked it so much, they've continued to do it. And I think, again, that helps reiterate that this is maybe initially scary for a landowner to think about restricting their property forever. But what we see in the landowner community is that landowners continue to do this again and again with different properties that they may own or buy, or neighbors. If a landowner protects their property, the neighbor says, "Hey, I think I'd like to try to do that too," and there's a domino effect.
Hey, can you show them where the Huguenot property
Yeah.
is? That's a
So
significant property as well,
right here
on the water.
on the water. The next property we're going to talk about is Good Hope, which is here, and Gregory Neck, which is there. Okay. Let's see. All right, so Good Hope is a large property in the town of Ridgeland. 2,000 acres of Good Hope was protected in 2008 with Low Country Land Trust. This, again, was a donated easement. There was not direct financial compensation for the easement. Just want to show that these things can all take place. And then Gregory Neck is another property that was protected in 2004. The Open Land Trust, my organization, holds the easement at Gregory Neck. In this case, the Jepson family was selling the property for the first time in 30 years, and they wanted to sell. They didn't want to own the property anymore, so they didn't place the conservation easement on the property themselves because they were not going to continue to own it. But the Nature Conservancy bought the property on the open real estate market, and they granted the conservation easement to the Open Land Trust with the intention and with the result of then selling portions of that property to private landowners to use. And so what happened with Gregory Neck is that it's a hugely important property from a conservation perspective. It's at the headwaters of the Broad River and kind of the top of what we now call the Uhaw District. But it's also within the flight path of Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort. So when applying for grant funding for this conservation easement, the Department of Defense actually contributed the majority of the funding at $6 million. And that is, real money from the Department of Defense, which has a program to fund land conservation in and around their airspace because the pilots would prefer to fly over farms and forest land than housing developments and billboards and cell towers and things like that. So the easement restricts cell towers, restricts subdivision. The Gregory Neck property can only be subdivided or can only be split into 7 pieces. So it's not going to be fragmented into a neighborhood or anything like that. But 4,000 acres, 4,400 acres can be split up to 7 times. It's now owned by 4 different landowners. So it's really only split 4 times, but 7 is the limit. With this particular property, like I said, there was $9 million awarded in grant funding. The majority of that came through the Department of Defense Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program. One grant came from the state, and Beaufort County Green Space Sales Tax Program actually invested in this property because of the water quality benefits. Even though the property was in Jasper County, the protection of this property has public benefit to Beaufort County voters and Beaufort County taxpayers downstream. If you fish off the Broad River Landing in Beaufort County, your water quality is improved because this property is protected forever. Okay, so questions about easement examples. I hope that the takeaway is that these are real people, real funding, real families. This is a decision that is never taken lightly, but is done thoughtfully and can really provide some public benefit for a growing community to protect its most important natural and cultural resources. We're going to talk about publicly owned properties next.
Yeah, I have a question.
Huh?
Let's say 40 years from now, everybody's dead in this room, right? And there's a new council, new group. When I know you said forever, but can some other group change the definition of forever?
No, so I'll send you easement language. The bulk of a conservation easement deals with that very question. It talks about assignment clauses. So let's say the worst case for myself personally, I'm no longer living and the open land trust no longer exists, right? That's a sad future in my imagination, but I will go there for you. What all of our easements say is that if we no longer cease to exist as an organization that is an accredited land trust with a similar mission and focus in this area will take on the forever. So imagine we are a local land trust that does work locally. There are regional, national, and international groups that also do this work. If we dissolve, it is unlikely that the regional group would dissolve. It would go to the regional land trust. Maybe Low Country Land Trust takes it over. Maybe the Nature Conservancy takes it over. Maybe Ducks Unlimited. But you're going to have an entity that is chartered and set up to do easement stewardship forever if we disappear.
And Jasper County Council, I assume, will be here in 40 years. Can they change it?
Not unless the easement is with Jasper County. If you all place a conservation easement on a property that you own, you can choose to make an easement more strict, but you could never choose to make an easement non-existent or less strict. But again, that would only be on a property that you own. Now, I will give you an example. In Beaufort County, when the Beaufort County program pays toward land conservation, if that property, let's say, is along a roadway. But I know the spirit of the question, Mayor Williams, and what I would say, I think you know this,